The frozen ones. I don't know why I agreed to come up here. Maybe it was the promise of fresh mountain air, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid. Either way, now I wish I'd never set foot in these woods. The cabin was supposed to be a rustic getaway. No electricity, no Wi-Fi, just a fireplace and a generator for emergencies. Jason and Mark, my two closest friends, had talked me into it. "Come on, Matt," they'd said. 3 nights in the mountains. Just us, some beers, and snowboarding. The first night was uneventful. We got in late, unloaded our stuff, and lit the fireplace. The snow was coming down hard outside, but we were warm inside, laughing over old stories. I remember Mark glancing at the window and frowning. "Thought I saw something out there," he muttered. Jason smirked. "Probably a deer." Mark didn't say anything else, but I noticed he kept checking the window. I told myself he was just being paranoid. The second day, we went snowboarding. The mountain was empty. No other tourists, no locals, just us and the untouched snow. It was eerie, but we didn't care. The fresh powder was perfect, and we had an amazing time. As the sun started setting, we packed up our gear and began the trek back to the cabin. That's when we saw them. At first, I thought they were just shapes in the trees, shadows cast by the setting sun. But as we got closer, I realized they were people. At least, they looked like people. They stood in the snow, still as statues. Their bodies were thin, too thin, like their skin was stretched too tightly over their bones. Their faces were pale and frostbitten, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. None of them moved. They just stared. "Holy shit," Jason whispered. Mark took a step back. "We need to go. Now." I wanted to ask who they were, why they were out here, but something in my gut told me not to. We turned and hurried back to the cabin. That night, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I tried to convince myself that what we saw was just a group of hikers, maybe people lost in the storm, but deep down, I knew better. Then came the knocking. It started around midnight, 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. We froze. Jason's face went pale. Mark gripped the poker from the fireplace. Another 3 knocks. "Who the hell would be out here this late?" I whispered. No one answered. Jason took a deep breath and stood. "Screw this," he muttered. He marched to the door and yanked it open. No one was there. The snow outside was untouched. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Jason slammed the door shut and locked it. We barely slept. Every few hours we heard it again. 3 knocks, always 3. And always when we checked, there was nothing there. By morning, we were exhausted. None of us spoke as we packed our things. We weren't waiting another night. As we loaded our gear into the truck, Mark stopped. His face was drained of color. "Guys," he choked out. "Look." I followed his gaze. There, lined up in the trees, were the frozen ones. Dozens of them now, standing perfectly still, watching us. Jason cursed under his breath and threw the last bag into the truck. "We're leaving. Now." We piled in, and Jason turned the key. The engine sputtered but didn't start. "No, no, no," Jason muttered, trying again. Nothing. The figures in the trees moved, not walking, not running, just shifting, as if the wind carried them forward. Their faces were still blank, still frozen, but they were closer now. "Try again," Mark shouted. Jason turned the key one last time. The engine roared to life. He slammed on the gas and we tore down the snow-covered road. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I could feel them watching us, feel their frozen eyes burning into my back. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, an hour away. We stumbled into a diner, shaking and breathless. An old man behind the counter eyed us. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost." Mark laughed, but it was hollow. "Something like that." The old man frowned. You didn't stay up near Black Hollow, did you? Jason and I exchanged glances. Yeah, I admitted. The man sighed and shook his head. You're lucky you got away. I leaned forward. What are they? His eyes darkened. No one knows for sure. Some say they were settlers who froze to death in a storm 100 years ago. Others say they were travelers who got lost and never found their way back. Either way, they're still out there. And when they find you, he trailed off. Jason swallowed. When they find you, what? The old man looked at us, his face grim. No one who's seen them twice has ever come back. Silence fell over the diner. Outside, the snow was falling again, thick and heavy. I told myself it was just a legend, just an old man trying to scare us. But even now, weeks later, I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I hear 3 slow knocks. Whispers in the snow. I never should have taken the shortcut. It was the dead of winter, and the mountain road was already treacherous, but I was running late. The sun had set an hour ago, and the snow was falling heavier by the minute. The GPS told me the back road would shave off 20 minutes. Stupidly, I listened. At first, it wasn't so bad. The road was narrow, but my headlights cut through the darkness, and my tires still had some grip. I kept telling myself it was fine, that I'd be back on the main highway soon. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something in the road. A figure standing in the snow. I slammed on the brakes. My heart pounded as my truck skidded slightly before coming to a stop. The figure didn't move. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I leaned forward, my stomach twisted. It was a person. They were dressed in an old-fashioned winter coat, long and heavy, dusted with snow. Their face was obscured by a thick scarf and hood. They stood completely still, directly in my path. I hesitated before rolling down my window slightly. Hey, do you need help? No answer. The wind howled, whipping snow across my windshield. I felt a chill creep into my bones, something deeper than the cold. Then they moved, not walking, just shifting, like a glitch in reality. 1 second they were 10 feet away, the next they were 5. I panicked and threw the truck into reverse. The tires spun, struggling for traction. My breath came fast and shallow as I watched the figure through the windshield. They took another unnatural step forward. That's when I saw their face, or rather the lack of one. Where their eyes and mouth should have been was smooth, pale skin, like frost-bitten porcelain. The wind carried a whisper through the trees, though I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It sounded distant, but somehow right next to my ear. "Come back," I screamed, flooring the gas. The tires finally caught, and I sped backward, barely keeping control as I swerved onto another path. I didn't look back. I kept driving until I was sure I'd put miles between me and that thing. But my relief was short-lived. As I reached a fork in the road, my stomach dropped. The figure was there, standing in the snow, blocking my path once again. I swore under my breath, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. This was impossible. There was no way they could have gotten ahead of me. The whisper came again, closer now. "Come back." I did the only thing I could think of. I swerved onto the other road, the one the GPS hadn't marked. The truck jolted violently over uneven terrain, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches heavy with snow. The road twisted sharply, forcing me to slow down. My hands were shaking. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that faceless thing right behind me. But the road ahead wasn't any better. 100 feet in front of me, the figure stood once more. Only this time, there were more of them. 5, no, 10, lined up along the road, blocking every possible way forward. I slammed the brakes, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. My headlights illuminated their frozen, lifeless forms. None of them moved. Then, all at once, they tilted their heads toward me. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, pressing into my skull. "Come back." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I opened them again, the figures were closer. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned as I floored the gas, swerving violently off the road. The truck bucked and jolted as I plowed through the snow, desperate to escape. My tires hit something, a ditch, maybe, and the world spun as my truck flipped. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figures standing over me, their faceless heads tilting in unison. Then, silence. They found me. I woke up in my truck, half buried in snow. The windshield was shattered, the engine dead. The air was impossibly still. My head ached, and my body was stiff with cold. Then I noticed something worse. The road was gone. The trees were different, twisted, skeletal things I didn't recognize. The sky was wrong, a dull, suffocating gray. And then I saw the figures. Dozens of them circling my wrecked truck, watching, waiting. The whispers came again, rising like the wind, but this time I understood. I hadn't escaped. I had come back. The frozen shadow. I never should have gone back to the cabin. It had been abandoned for years, buried in the snow-covered forest where no one dared to tread. It belonged to my grandfather, who vanished one winter without a trace. My family never spoke of it, but I needed answers. The air was brittle with cold as I hiked up the narrow path, my breath curling in the wind like ghostly tendrils. The trees loomed, skeletal and silent, their branches weighed down by ice. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, its roof sagging, windows black and empty. I stepped inside, my boots echoing against the wooden floor. Dust coated everything. The fireplace was cold, the furniture draped in white sheets like forgotten corpses. But something was off. The air smelled wrong, stale yet tinged with something rotten. I turned, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Fresh, leading from the door to the center of the room. My footprints. But there was something else. A second set, smaller, barefoot, leading deeper into the cabin. A chill crept up my spine. "Hello?" My voice barely broke the silence. No answer. Just the wind outside whistling through the cracks. I followed the prints cautiously. They stopped at a door. The basement. The handle was ice cold as I twisted it. The door creaked open, revealing stairs that plunged into darkness. The air was colder down there, the stench stronger. My flashlight flickered as I stepped down. Then I heard it. A whisper. Software ragged, like someone struggling to breathe. I froze. The beam of my flashlight wavered, and then in the corner of the basement, something moved. A figure, small, hunched. The light caught its face. My breath caught. It was my grandfather, or what was left of him. His skin was gray, pulled too tight over his bones. His eyes, milky and lifeless, snapped toward me. He smiled. A low, wheezing laugh escaped his throat. "You finally came back," he rasped. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. "You left me here," he whispered. "No," I gasped. "You disappeared. They never looked for me." His voice was hollow. "But I never left." The temperature dropped sharply. My breath turned to mist. The shadows around him stretched, crawling up the walls like living things. I turned and bolted up the stairs. The door slammed behind me as I reached the top. The footprints. They were gone. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. I had to get out. My fingers fumbled with the lock. The whisper came again, right behind me. "You never should have come back." The last thing I felt was ice-cold hands wrapping around my throat. Frozen silence. I don't know how long I've been out here. Time feels strange in the cold. It started as a simple winter hike, something to clear my head. I had been feeling restless, suffocated by the routines of everyday life. The silence of the forest called to me, the promise of crisp, untouched snow and solitude too tempting to resist. The first few hours were perfect. My boots crunched over the fresh snow, and my breath curled into the frigid air in ghostly tendrils. The trees stretched endlessly in all directions, their branches skeletal against the pale gray sky. I followed the trail markers, confident in my direction. Then the snow started falling harder. At first, it was gentle, a light dusting that made everything feel even more serene. But soon the flakes thickened, swirling wildly in the wind, erasing my path. I checked my phone. No signal. My footprints, my way back, vanished beneath fresh snowfall in minutes. I told myself to stay calm. I still had my flashlight, my map. But the deeper I went, the less the terrain made sense. The trees looked the same, stretching tall and bare in every direction. The trail markers were gone. It felt like the forest itself had shifted, folding in on me, leading me somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. That's when I saw the cabin. It was old, half buried in snow, nestled between two massive trees. The windows were dark. No smoke rose from a chimney. No footprints led to the door. But it was there, standing solid against the storm. I knocked, half hoping someone would answer. No response. The door was unlocked. Inside, it was warmer, dusty but not abandoned. The wooden table had chairs neatly tucked under it. A firewood pile was stacked by the stone fireplace, though no flames burned. A pot sat on the old iron stove, its contents frozen solid. It felt lived in. Not recently, but not long enough to feel truly forgotten. I should have left. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I sat down. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was something else. But my eyelids felt heavier than they should have. Just a moment of rest, I told myself, just long enough to gather my thoughts. I don't know when I fell asleep. I woke to silence. Absolute silence. No wind, no rustling trees, just a deep, suffocating stillness. Then I heard it. A soft crunch of snow just outside the door, my breath caught in my throat. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone or something was out there. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then a knock. Not at the door, at the window. The sound was slow, rhythmic, deliberate. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid it would hear me. Knock, knock, knock. I turned my head, just enough to see the window's edge from the corner of my eye. A face stared back at me. It wasn't human. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tightly over sharp, angular bones. The eyes were black, hollow voids, and its mouth... God, its mouth was too wide, curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Then, as if it knew I was awake, its head tilted, just slightly, and the door creaked open. Whispers in the snow. The storm had swallowed the world whole. I had been driving for hours through the snow, desperate to reach my cabin before nightfall. The road signs were buried, and my GPS had long since given up. It was just me in the endless white void, my headlights barely cutting through the blizzard. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding on the ice. My breath caught in my throat as my car lurched to a stop just feet away. The figure didn't move. It was a woman, barefoot, wearing only a thin nightgown, her skin pale as the snow around her. I rolled down my window just an inch. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, just stood there staring at me with hollow, sunken eyes. Something about her felt wrong. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I hesitated. She would freeze to death out here. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong on a human face. Too wide, too empty, stretching like her skin was being pulled by invisible hands. The wind howled, and I saw movement behind her. More figures half hidden in the swirling snow. Dozens of them, standing deathly still, their faces blank. I felt a primal fear grip my chest, the kind that made my skin crawl and my body scream to run. My hands shook as I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I had to. A hand slammed against my window. I screamed, jerking away. The woman was inches from my face now, her fingers leaving no fog on the glass, as if she wasn't really there. Her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. I didn't wait to find out. I floored the gas. The car fishtailed, but I didn't stop. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the road was empty. No woman, no figures, just endless snow. I didn't stop driving until I reached my cabin, shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the door. Inside, I locked every bolt and collapsed onto the couch, my breath ragged. Then I heard it, a whisper from inside the room. I turned slowly, my stomach dropping. The woman stood in the corner, her nightgown billowing slightly as if caught in an invisible wind, and she was smiling. That same awful, too wide smile. I scrambled backward, my hand grasping for anything I could use as a weapon, but she didn't move toward me. She only tilted her head, her lips moving again, that same whisper I couldn't quite hear. Then she stepped forward, just one step, and the whisper turned into something else. Laughter. Low, quiet at first, but growing, filling the cabin, rattling the windows. The fire I had lit minutes ago snuffed out instantly, plunging the room into cold and darkness. My breath came in short gasps as my fingers fumbled for my phone, but my hands were numb. Too numb. She took another step. The floor creaked beneath her, but her feet left no footprints in the thin layer of snow I had tracked in. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering a prayer under my breath. And then, silence. The laughter stopped. I opened my eyes. She was gone. The room was empty. The fire flickered back to life, crackling as if nothing had happened. My breath fogged in the air, my body trembling. Had I imagined it? A nightmare. It had to be a nightmare. Then I heard something outside, footsteps in the snow, slow, measured, circling the cabin. I forced myself to stand, moving toward the window. My fingers trembled as I wiped away the frost and peered out into the storm. At first, I saw nothing, just swirling white, the trees swaying in the wind. Then, between the trees, I saw them. Figures, watching, waiting, and in the center of them stood the woman, still smiling. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering. The footsteps outside grew louder, closer. The whispering began again, seeping through the walls, surrounding me. And then, a knock at the door. Software, almost polite. I held my breath, every muscle in my body frozen in terror. Then came another knock, and another. And then, all at once, they stopped. Silence. I stayed there for what felt like hours, staring at the door, waiting. But the whispering had faded. The footsteps were gone. When I finally found the courage to move, I peeked out the window again. The figures had vanished. The only thing left was the snow, and a single set of footprints leading from the trees, stopping just outside my door.